Okay, so we can start. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I'm sending you a warm welcome from Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. My name is Regine Schönenberg. I am the director of the Brazilian branch of the Heinrich-Böll Foundation. I'm a political scientist with an eventful researcher's past in the Amazon region and your moderator today. We are satisfied to stage at the occasion of the first International Day for the Prevention of and Fight Against All Forms of Transnational Organized Crime, a discussion that aims to connect the most remote territories of our planet to the fast expansion of organized crime in the most diverse social contexts. With our discussion, The Last Frontier, Transnational Organized Crime and the Fight Against Climate Change, we intend to interlink human security and organized crime with the debate of climate politics, introducing the example of environmental crimes in the Brazilian Amazon. Besides outlining the current situation, we intend to link up to the transforming institutional frameworks and approaches, as well as to the broader debate of democratic resilience and strategies to strengthen the latter. So let me present our speakers. Simon Ilse is head of the HBS Global Unit on Human Security in Vienna and will give us an introduction to the global institutional framework and the concept of human security. Our panelists are Roberto Araújo, anthropologist and senior researcher at the Museu Paraense Emílio Göldi in Pará, Brazil. Roberto is researching the criminalization of the Amazon since decades and will give us deep insights to its very local manifestations. Welcome, Roberto. Carla Suarez is Program Coordinator Environmental Crimes at UNODC, United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime. The currently published World Wildlife Crime Report of her department already highlights the connection of serious organized crime groups with environmental crime in remote areas. We are curious to hear more about it. Welcome, Carla. Christina Ammerhauser is a senior analyst working on the Global Initiative's TOC project on environmental crime called EcoSolve, where she leads the work stream on corruption. She also co-leads the organization's work on illicit financial flows. We are very interested to learn more about EcoSolve's accountability and participatory approach regarding data production. Welcome, Christina. Professor Berit Blieseman de Guevara is a political scientist and professor of international politics at Aberystwyth University in Wales, UK. She is the principal researcher of the Creating Safer Spaces Research Network. The Creating Safer Spaces Network supports 26 research projects around the world that further our understanding of unarmed civilian protection and community self-protection. We are keen to see what example of a possible problem-solving approach Berit has brought us. Welcome, Berit. Regarding the proceedings, every panelist has roughly 7 minutes for first inputs. Questions and contributions of the audience can be registered in the chat, which will be administered by my co-moderator from Berlin Latin American Department, Mareike Bödefeld. After the inputs, the panelists are invited to a first round among themselves. Meanwhile, the contributions of our listeners will be systematized and then handed on to the speakers by Mareike. In the chat as well, you'll find instructions how you can find the right channel for translation. We wish you an exciting 90 minutes of learning and debate. So the floor is yours, Simon.
Thank you very much, Regina, and a very warm welcome also from my side to our Böll.Global today. So today marks, as Regina outlined, the very first United Nations International Day for the prevention of and fight against all forms of transnational organized crime. This day was established by a UN General Assembly resolution this year in March and emphasizes the urgent need to address harmful effects of organized crime on global security and sustainable development. These are hectic, complex times, obviously, as the climate COP in Baku, Azerbaijan is underway. We hear weekly, almost daily calls by climate scientists for more consequential global climate action. At the same time, Donald Trump is re-elected US president, putting multilateral action off and deal-making probably on the agenda. But the undeniable truth is global warming, as well as international organized crime, are global challenges and cannot be solved by any nation or region alone. But with so many challenges worldwide, we have to be focused. Too often in our advocacy, electoral campaigns, or public policy, we're focusing on the wrong thing, which once coined the phrase, "It's the economy, stupid." So today we want to say it's perhaps the informal economy, stupid, it's organized crime. So just to give you a little example from my work for the foundation in North Africa and in the Balkans, be it in post-revolution Tunisia or in the EU enlargement process for Serbia, reform processes often seem to hit this invisible wall, leaving you confused as to why a useful change just doesn't go through. It's often the deep state. It's organized crime, stupid. So now here at the Global Unit for Human Security based in Vienna, Heinrich-Böll-Stiftung underscores its commitment to a different human-oriented security understanding beyond purely military or state-led efforts. Just to give you a little outline about the problems we're facing in this area. So far in 2024, wildfires have destroyed over 11 million hectares of land in the Brazilian Amazon, largely reversing conservation efforts started by President Lula. 117 countries worldwide are grappling with significant criminal markets related to the trafficking and exploitation of flora, fauna, and non-renewable sources like gold. That's why we want to set transnational organized crime and its connection to the environment as a topic today. This event is meant to be a kickoff call for cooperation between the climate and the security community, we hope. And I would love to discuss some of the following questions with you today. What could innovative approaches to security sector reform actually look like? How could new, broader definitions of security cater to diverse cultural and environmental realities and communities on the ground? And how can we actually address the receiving end, making organized crime so profitable? So I leave it at that. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'm looking forward to the discussion today.
Thank you very much, Simon. So I think we just continue straight away. We dive into the Amazon, and I hand on the floor to Roberto Araújo.
Well, okay.
Yes, hello everyone.
I would like to thank you the invitation, particularly Dr. Regine Schonenberg, and I'm glad to be here with you and looking forward to the discussions with the colleagues. Mas eu me desculpo, vou falar em
now I will
português.
switch to Portuguese, which is my native language. I hope that's okay.
E eu tenho uma apresentação.
So I prepared a few
mostrar.
slides that I would like to share today.
Well, então,
All right, here we are.
primeira coisa que eu gostaria
So the
de
first
dizer, muito
thing I would like to
rapidamente,
share with you,
que
or
a
what I
gente
would like to
tem
talk about very briefly,
é que
is that
eu estou ouvindo a tradução, isso é normal?
I'm sorry, but I'm hearing the translation, which is confusing me. Maybe someone can help me out from the technical team.
Não, tu não deveria escutar a tradução.
Yeah, you shouldn't be hearing the translation. You have to adjust the
Porque
settings.
fica complicado eu falar e me ouvir
Yeah,
logo depois
It's
traduzir.
really complicating things
Jason.
because I hear myself and the translation. Jason, maybe you can help us out.
Enfim, eu vou continuar para não
All right,
perder
I
muito
will
tempo.
try to continue so we don't lose any time.
É muito importante dizer que o
It is very
processo de
important to
expansão da fronteira
emphasize
agrícola
that
na
the
Amazônia,
expansion of the agricultural frontier in the Amazon region,
em particular o processo de criação das municipalidades,
especially when it's about creating new municipalities in that region,
se constrói em torno de atividades ilegais.
all this has to do with illegal activities that are happening in the region.
Como a grilagem de terras,
So what do I mean by that? Land grabbing,
exploração ilegal de madeira, etc.
illegal
Essas
logging,
companhias
etc.
ou
So there's companies involved in
que
that,
têm essas
entrepreneurs
atividades
that carry out these
acabam
activities,
controlando o
and they
poder
end up
político local.
controlling the political powers at the local level.
E isso dá para eles acesso a vários
So they
fundos
also
públicos,
control the access to a lot of public funds.
Neste quadro, nós temos
So against
uma
this backdrop,
tentativa de
what we
sintetizar esse
see
processo.
is an initiative that tries to synthesize this process.
Então, aqui à
You can see
esquerda,
this
nós temos
on my slide right now. On the left side,
uma apropriação fundiária primária. Não é?
it talks about primary land appropriation.
Normalmente, legalmente,
So usually what
se
happens
você
from a legal perspective
está
is
se
the
apropriando de
following.
uma terra nos limites da lei,
You grab
você
hold
pode
of land,
transformar,
and once
você
the
pode
land is
pedir
yours,
uma
you can
documentação
ask for a documentation
que dá para você a
that
posse da terra,
officially
que vai se
states that
transformar,
you're
então,
the proprietor of this real estate, of this piece of
fazenda,
land,
lote ou num assentamento fundiário.
and then you have legal possession of this piece of land.
Só que, na maior parte do tempo, esse
Now,
processo de
unfortunately, what
apropriação
happens
primária,
is that this
ele
primary
vai,
land appropriation
é
process
ameaçado por uma
is
expropriação
threatened
violenta.
by
Roberto,
very
desculpa,
violent
tu ainda tá me
expropriation.
escutando?
Ah,
Você
Are you
ainda
still hearing
escuta a
yourself?
mas
tradução?
é porque eu
Roberto.
estou me ouvindo, fica
Yes,
muito
I'm hearing
difícil.
myself the whole
Sim,
time, so it's very difficult
o
for me to
Jason
talk.
escreveu no
Ok.
chat como tu pode apagar isso,
So,
porque eu não sei
We're just
daqui.
trying to help
Dá
out
uma
Roberto
olhada
so
no
that he
chat.
won't be hearing the translation anymore.
Momento, eu vou ter
Translation
que
will resume as soon as he continues with his presentation.
Chat. Você segue no canal em português, tá bom? Ok. Então eu sigo no canal em português.
Português, dá para fazer?
Record. Oh, meu Deus, agora eu não estou achando isso aqui.
Tá no more.
Mas eu não estou achando no More. Eu coloquei.
Translation will resume as soon as the speaker is resuming his presentation.
Bom,
Ok.
enfim, eu acho que eu
All
vou
right.
tentar continuar
So
assim.
moving forward, I'll just try to continue.
Então, como vocês veem, esse
So
processo
you can see it on the
todo,
slide. This whole process
é-
that is depicted here
tem setas vermelhas que mostram os
There's
fluxos
red arrows
ilegais
that
e
show
setas verdes que mostram os
illegal
fluxos
flows,
legais.
and the green arrows show the legal flows.
Então, você tem rendas que vêm de uma origem
So what you can
ilegal,
see
estão
here is that there's
investidas
income
na terra,
derived
né?
from illegal
Por exemplo, o
processes, for
agenciamento
example,
de
legal private
pistoleiros,
income.
de trabalho escravo,
You
a
have slave
corrupção
labor, for
de
example. You have
pessoal de
agency of gunmen,
cartório, de
corruption of
funcionários
notaries, local
públicos, né?
notaries, of civil servants, etc.
E
It's
outros
directly linked to
rendimentos
the illegal land
ilegais,
grabbing
como
process. And then, of course, there's
tráfico de armas, tráfico de
other
drogas,
illegal private
tráfico de
income,
madeira, etc.
and
né?
weapon smuggling, drug trafficking, etc.
Isso acaba investido
So all
na
this
expropriação da
ends
terra,
up
na
leading
produção de
to
falsos
the
documentos e
expropriation,
na constituição
the
de
emission of false
grandes
documents,
fazendas, não é?
and also to very large estates in the region.
Através dos contatos políticos, no entanto,
So
você
through existing
consegue
political
transformar
relations,
essas
people end
grandes
up transforming
extensões de terra
these
que são
huge
obtidas de maneira ilegal
areas. They
em
are,
patrimônio
people
reconhecido. A
grab
partir
those
daí,
lands
você pode
illegally,
ter acesso
and then
a
they
rendas
use
de
these
origem
lands in
legal,
order to
né,
generate income for
que são
themselves.
vinculadas diretamente à propriedade, não é? E
So income
a
that
diversas
derives from
aplicações
property
financeiras.
and also private legal
Então,
capital,
o resultado de tudo
financial
isso é que
applications.
você
So the
tem uma
result of all
espécie
of
de
this
lavagem do
is there's a
dinheiro
type of
das
money laundering
atividades ilegais
that's going on.
através do
Illegal
reconhecimento da
activities
terra como propriedade,
are
ao passo que
laundered
esses
through the legal
investimentos de origem
la-
legal vão acabar
land process,
financiando
and this ends up
indiretamente as
financing a lot of
rendas de origem,
activities
o uso dessas rendas de forma
that
ilegal.
are
Né? Eu acho
actually
que
illegal.
vamos passar aqui.
So jumping on to the
Então,
next slide,
esses vínculos eles são
these links,
fortalecidos
they
com
were
a
strengthened
chegada da soja
further
nos
with the
anos
arrival
90,
of
2000,
soy
não é?
in the
Que acaba
1990s,
elegendo
2000s.
representantes no Congresso Nacional, ganhando
They
representações no Senado.
reached other political levels, electing people to the National Congress and getting
Com
representation in
esse
general terms.
suporte para a legalização,
With the
a
support
apropriação
for
das
legalization,
públicas vai
the appropriation
reforçar
of
a
public lands
capacidade de
speeds up
reintegrar
the
dinheiro em
reintegration
rendas
of
de
money from
atividades ilegais
illegal
no mercado
activities
legal, né?
into the legal market.
Caso exponencial que a Regina
And
conhece muito
the
bem é o caso
exponential
do Leonardo
increase that we've seen
que era grande proprietário
is there's
do
one
Xingu
big landholder, Felix
e
Felix do
grande
Xingu,
traficante de drogas
Leonardo
que
Dias
diretamente
Mendonça,
que transportava drogas
owners of cattle ranches,
do Peru para a
which led
Colômbia e da
to the
Colômbia
transport of drugs to Peru, to
vários
Colombia,
laboratórios em grandes
through
quantidades. Ele foi preso
large
pela
quantities
Polícia
of
Federal.
drugs, and he was imprisoned by the federal police later on.
Então, várias tentativas
So there were a number of attempts
transformar esse caos fundiário, de regulamentar esse caos
transform this
fundiário,
chaos
como
that dominated in these
cadastro
regions.
ambiental rural,
Brazil has a national environmental registry of rural properties,
elas são deturpadas e
but
usadas
these
para a grilagem de
attempts
terras,
were
não é? Por
often
exemplo,
abused for more
essa
illegal
área
land
aqui,
grabbing. This region right here that I'm showing on the slide,
essa área é a terra indígena
you
Ituna
can see
Itatá,
indigenous
não é?
lands.
Então, você tem 94%
And if
da
you look
terra
at the pie
indígena
chart,
Ituna Itatá
94%
foi colocada
of
no
this
cadastro
land
ambiental
or
rural,
was
que é
entered
puramente
into this
declaratório
environmental
por proprietários
registry
individuais,
by
para
individual
tentar
proprietors.
E houve uma intensa
And
movimentação
then, of
aqui
course, there
dentro dessa
was
terra,
a
não é?
movement here, you can see that, around the
não
land
com garimpo. Não é?
with
Vocês veem aqui nessa
a lot
foto
of illegal mining.
extensão,
You can see
né,
the mining activities and what they caused in the region.
com grande maquinário, não é? Nós não
So
estamos mais falando do
using
pequeno
major
garimpo, né, do
equipment, we're not
pequeno
talking about
garimpeiro,
small-scale mining. This is
mas nós
really
estamos
at a
falando
very large
de
scale using industrial equipment.
isso. Outro exemplo muito interessante
There's another
é
example that I'm
esse aqui,
showing you right here.
o exemplo da terra indígena Apitereua, que foi
Apitereua, also
recentemente
indigenous lands.
desintrusada, não é? E vocês podem ver
As you
aqui
can
em
see right
amarelo
here on the
nessas
images
imagens,
in
essa é a terra
yellow,
indígena
right over
Apitereua.
here.
Em amarelo nós temos o desmatamento.
In
É
yellow, we see
desmatamento que vem do leste para oeste,
the
seguindo em direção
what is going on in
às
the
terras
region,
indígenas, e
deforestation
entrando pelas
that's
terras
branching out
indígenas,
more and more, and you can see how indigenous lands are also affected.
Então, nessa área, nós passamos dos anos 60
So in
com uma
the
pequena
60s
extração
and
de castanha
70s,
e
some
seringa,
exploration of
até
nuts.
atualmente,
And then
com
over the years,
uma
it
extração
changed.
mineral
And
de
right now,
grande
there's a lot of
pecuária na terra
mining and also cattle herding.
Agora, o interessante é o seguinte:
So what's most interesting
no momento da
is this
desintrusão,
right
do
here.
processo de desintrusão da terra indígena, ou seja, de expulsão dos
With
invasores,
the
que ocorreu
expulsion of the
agora em
invaders,
2023,
which
2024,
happened in 2023, 2024,
os próprios agentes do Estado
this led to a situation where even
foram
the agents representing the
emboscados e
state
feridos.
were hurt, were attacked
E
when
nós
doing
temos aqui
their jobs. So what we can see right
notícias de
here,
jornal,
it's headlines from newspapers,
pessoas que são
and
oficiais
they
públicos, pessoas
show
do
us that public
legislativo local, não é?
officials
Temos a Polícia
are
Federal
also
prende uma vereadora que liderava
imprisoned
invasões na terra indígena
because they were
Apitereua,
responsible for an invasion of these indigenous lands.
Essa pessoa tinha inclusive uma
So,
farmácia e posto de combustíveis no
This
interior da
person
terra
had
indígena.
gas stations and pharmacy in the middle of the indigenous lands.
Nessa terra indígena, a
And
Polícia Federal
in these indigenous lands, the federal police
investigou um senador e
investigated
pré-candidato ao
a
governo do
senator,
Pará,
a candidate for
como
governorship
lobista
of
de uma
Pará,
cooperativa de garimpeiros que
as
exploravam
member
ouro ilegal.
of illegal miners exploring gold illegally.
Então, eu estou terminando já.
So I'm almost coming to the end of my presentation. I know that time is short.
Nós temos aqui uma espécie de paradoxo
But what we
de uma
see is a
ilegalidade
paradox of
legitimizada,
legitimized illegality.
que mostra uma fraqueza
Shows the
institucional
institutional
que fica
weakness
evidente
that is
na
evident
inabilidade do Estado
in the state's
de se opor à
inability to
lógica
oppose
de
the
mercado
logic of a
fundiário
savage
selvagem,
land market.
que leva à
This in
destruição
turn leads
ambiental
to
e
environmental destruction
a caos fundiário.
and land chaos.
Então, essa noção de caos
So this
fundiário
notion of land
se
chaos,
refere
it's a
à
term I used
situação
before.
que
It
tem
refers to
altas
situations
probabilidades de
in which there's a
ilegalidade,
high probability of illegality in land
relações
ownership
dos proprietários de terra, e coexistindo
and
com
it
baixas
coexists with
probabilidades
very low
de uma distinção
probabilities
efetiva entre o
of
que é
effective
legal e
distinction
legítimo e o que
between
não
what is
é.
legal and what isn't.
Então, isso é uma coisa
So this
que
is
não apenas ameaça
something that
as
not
comunidades
just
locais,
threatens local
mas
communities,
como não existe
it goes
também
beyond that.
Uma rede institucional
There's no institutional
que
network
proteja as comunidades
that could
locais,
protect local
também
communities,
isso reforça a capacidade
and
de
this
cooptar alguns grupos territorializados para as
further
ações criminais.
difficults the situation and makes it easier to commit crimes in the region.
Então, eu vou ficar por aqui.
So that was my presentation. I hope I got my message across. I'm really sorry, it was very confusing to hear the translation at the same time when I was presenting. Thank you, Roberto. I'm very sorry that we were not able to solve the problem. But maybe we can try again. If you choose the globe interpretation, then you can choose the different channels. And if you speak Portuguese, you have to choose a Portuguese channel, and then you won't hear the translation. But we got the message, so thank you for that. Thank you for your presentation. It was very interesting. We will get questions in the chat, and then later on, we will hear more details during the Q&A session. So now we will continue with our next speaker. Check my notes. Carla is next, Carla Suarez. And she will tell us a little bit about her perspective from the environmental program of the United Nations, UNODC. Carla, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Regina, and thank you all. Hope you can hear me well. From what we have heard from previous speakers, it's important and it's safe to say that the world has come to a sort of agreement to combat crimes that affect the environment. And this is a slight and important difference with environmental crimes. Combating crimes that affect the environment means combating illicit activities that in one way or another cause damage on the environment, while environmental crimes means acknowledging and naming which of those illegal activities directly harm the environment. So right now we are on an agreement, on a world agreement, that we need to combat crimes that affect the environment. Because crimes that affect the environment are often and even more frequently involved with organized crime and part of the criminal offer that organized crime provides in the illicit economies they are involved. So we, as UNODC, as the secretariat of the UNTOC and the UNCAC Convention, it's very important to have a role among these. It's important to mention that upon request of the member states on the agreement that they have reached in the General Assembly, they have produced at least 5 resolutions to combat wildlife trafficking. This means that the agreement of the member states had invited us and had requested that United Nations as a system start working on addressing these illegal activities. And we as UNODC has been invited to provide this technical assistance under the scope of the United Nations Convention against Transnational Crime and against corruption. It's also important to mention that other General Assembly resolutions had requested member states to fight against illicit wildlife trafficking, illicit trafficking of minerals and metals, and provide support to member states to fight against illegal mining. And this is very important because it's constantly acknowledged that there are some illicit activities going on against the environment and, of course, against human beings and human life, and it needs to be addressed in a worldwide scope. It's important to mention, finally, that the world is trying to move forward, including what's the new perspective of environmental crimes under the UNTOC Convention. And right now, we are currently working on the 4th protocol of the UNTOC Convention, which means that under this specific protocol on environmental crimes or crimes that affect the environment, the world will go along with particular definitions, with particular ways in which apply penalties, in which these crimes can be investigated, tools that can be applied in particular for these crimes, and cooperation mechanisms that can be applied to counteract these transnational offenses that happen worldwide. In the particular case of environment, because environment cannot be framed within the boundaries of the frontiers of the countries. So this is the role that we have, and this is how environmental crimes and crimes that affect the environment become part of the mandate and part of the activities that UNODC does among the United Nations system. Over.
You're finished already, Carla?
Yeah. I have, Yes, I have
Yes.
some info about the theory of change that we manage in UNODC to address the environmental crimes. Should I go with this information in this moment or wait for the next question?
You can do this information, you can add on this information, and then we move on. Okay?
Thank you. Thank you, Regine. Yes, under the framework that I just shared with you, it's important to share with you, which is the theory of change that we believe that will help the world and each member state to fight against crimes that affect the environment. So under the premise that organized crime produces crimes that affect the environment, we believe that if member states criminalize crimes that affect the environment in similar terms and acknowledge the seriousness of this crime as part of the criminal offer of organized crime through technical assistance, which is our job, to conduct technical law reform with the highest levels that environmental law and environmental crime criminal law demands, general prevention, primary criminalization, and raise awareness around environmental crimes can be achieved. And this is one of the very first steps that need to be taken. Because while there are some countries that right now are aware of the damage and the danger and the impact that environmental crimes and crimes that affect the environment cause, there are some other countries that are still not on the same side. So it's important to start working on these legal frameworks that are stronger against crimes that affect the environment. Also, we believe that if member states strengthen their capacities to detect, investigate, prosecute, and sentence crimes that affect the environment by introducing an approach that develops a strategic planning from crime scene to court, gathering all the SOPs, all the technical information to address why this use of natural resources is not legal and is causing harm, more successful convictions can be achieved. It's important to mention that crimes that affect the environment and environmental crimes are one of the more profitable crimes, and in the other hand, are one of the crimes with less chance to be convicted because they are very technical. And it can be, all the evidence can be blurred and confused within the branches of environmental crimes and change this crime to an administrative sanction. So it's important to improve the knowledge on how environmental crimes and crimes that affect the environment happen, how to investigate them, how to detect them, and how to present this case in court with very technical and high-level arguments. We also believe that if member states learn how to combat environmental crimes under the premises of combating organized crime, including the use of special investigation techniques through special and contextualized training and mentoring adopted in their legislation and their justice system, organized criminal groups involved in environmental crimes can be detected. As we have heard before, the same routes and the same tools that organized crime use for drug trafficking, for human trafficking, for arms trafficking and guns trafficking are used for environmental crimes because the whole chain is already set. So we need to have tools that allow us to investigate how natural resources and how environment is illegally exploited through the same tools that organized crime has. The use of these special techniques will help us not to identify the last individuals supporting this value change of the crime, but the ones that are providing the income, that are providing the money, that are providing the huge machinery that's needed to commit illegal mining, for example, which is very expensive. And this is what we believe the world and member states should move forward. We also believe that the member states improve their abilities to engage in informal and formal international cooperation through technical assistance and facilitation in the creation of safe spaces for exchange information, this transnational characteristic that organized crime has, and in the particular case of environmental crimes has, organized crime can be disrupted because we cannot contain the impact of environmental crimes within the border of a country. It's simply not going to happen.
Okay.
And finally, can I just run the last conclusion?
Yes.
If member states adopt a comprehensive mechanism against environmental crimes that includes following the money and addressing an anti-corruption framework through special technical assistance, organized criminal groups involved in environmental crimes can finally be dismantled. Thank you so much, Regina.
Thank you, Carla. This leads over perfectly to Christina. I think she can relate to your last words and then present her thoughts about it from the perspective of EcoSolve. Christina, floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Regine, for the introduction, and thank you very much for the invitation to join this discussion today. To start, I just briefly wanted to introduce the Global Initiative Against Transnational Organized Crime. The Global Initiative was established 10 years ago to enhance independent research and analysis about illicit economies globally and to develop building blocks of a global strategy against transnational organized crime. It now includes a network of over 660 experts all around the world, as well as more than 100 staff who are clustered in a number of regional observatories around the world, as well as thematic portfolios, including one specifically focusing and working on environmental crimes. So in preparation for this event, I was asked to reflect briefly on where we see some of the gaps in the UN systems. And one of the points that we've always made about the multilateral responses to organized crime more generally is that the mandates of the UN to deal with the problem are not lacking, but they're too widely dispersed across the UN system, and there's no central strategy to really pull it together. We see that there's little effective follow-up mechanisms, and there's a lack of research and awareness, and the discussions do not include many community voices. And that's also the case in environmental crimes. The UN Convention Against Transnational Organized Crime, the UNTOC, and the UN Convention Against Corruption, the UNCAC, are both suited and able to deal with environmental crimes. And at the same time, CITES, while not a criminal justice instrument, does provide also for a framework for protecting specific species from being traded. And in addition to that, environmental crime or corruption related to it comes up in the work of a number of other bodies as well. And Simon has already mentioned the climate COP taking place in Baku as we speak. So we see a lot of activity on environmental crime and a strong desire to improve or alter the global framework guiding the response to environmental crime. But this is very fragmented across different forums. And I think it was also mentioned already, many of the main states that are taking this agenda forward sometimes also do so in a fragmented way, with specific ministries taking the lead and with civil society often not included. And there's also a divergence between the positions of states who might generally agree that more needs to be done. And this mainly revolves around whether any new legal instruments, such as the protocol to the UNTOC, should focus more narrowly on wildlife trafficking or on a broader set of environmental crimes. And there's still no consensus on this, but the UNTOC conference has recently agreed to set up a new expert group to explore the different options through a resolution that was agreed at its conference of parties last month. And this work has now put more focus on the UNTOC process, but there are more fundamental issues that we believe need to be addressed for any of these developments towards new legal instruments to really be effective. Firstly, as I've already mentioned, more strategic coordination across the multilateral system. Secondly, more focus on research, evidence, and follow-up. And our research has found that international cooperation to implement the existing instruments that we have is lacking and awareness is low, especially with the UNTOC. And at the same time, there's a need to centralize and coordinate data and evidence to support more effective responses. Thirdly, we believe we need a stronger focus on corruption, which weakens and undermines the UN responses that we do have. And fourthly, we need to bring community voices closer to policymaking processes and supporting their role locally. And so I just briefly wanted to introduce the EcoSolve project, which was really created to enhance solutions to environmental crime, including through the multilateral system, and it tries to contribute to the challenges that I've just outlined in a couple of ways. It's a 3-year EU-funded project with a mandate to deliver innovative solutions to tackle environmental crime. And at its core, EcoSolve aims to generate new data around environmental crime and enhance existing mechanisms around data sharing and data cooperation. So We're collecting data through multiple ways, including our global monitoring system, which monitors online detections of illegal wildlife trade on e-commerce platforms and websites and social media platforms. And we're investigating corruption and seek to document how elite protection further drives and enables environmental crime. And just very briefly on our corruption work stream, across our work, we found that corruption and environmental crime ranges really from low-level corruption and bribery to high-level elite protection within law enforcement, judicial system, broader control authorities and other government agencies, as well as corporations. And it acts as a systematic enabler for organized environmental crime and is facilitating these crimes across complex value chains. Corruption and environmental crime can be so damaging that it creates political instability and entrenches systems of patronage or elite capture of democratic institutions. And where corruption becomes entrenched, responders have major difficulty in tackling the core drivers of environmental crime and in enforcing regulations. However, while there's some evidence actually on how corruption works at the lower levels, we see that there's significantly less information on high-level corruption, elites that are driving illicit logging, for example, and they are rarely named and often remain such a nebulous concept. And through EcoSolve, we're trying to change this, put some of the names on the record, and incentivize further law enforcement action. Through EcoSolve, we're also working with communities on the ground to gather their perspectives about the core concerns and trends on environmental crime. We think local communities are really essential in responding to environmental crimes, but many prevention strategies overlook their perspectives. This gap weakens the effectiveness of law enforcement and at times even worsens the situations by not accounting for the deep impact it has on these communities. And so we prioritize building trust with local communities in affected areas, and we do this by visiting their territories, understanding their needs and challenges, and inviting them to resilience dialogues to assess the environmental crimes that are affecting the areas, identify community challenges, as well as ways to bridge the gap between law enforcement and local residents. And we've already implemented this approach in Brazil and in Indonesia, and we're expanding and planning to expand this to other countries around the world, probably including the DRC and Colombia next year. And we also then seek to bring these community perspectives directly to the discussions at the UN. For example, we've brought a number of indigenous and community leaders to the UNCTAD COP in Vienna last month, which offered them the opportunity to really highlight the environmental and social damages caused by organized crime, including environmental crime in their communities. And I'll stop here now, but just to say that the activities of EcoSolve are quite diverse, but they aim to convene actors across different sectors in the UN system, really with the focus of building dialogue and engagement. And I think somebody has already put the link into the chat, but I'll also, again, provide the link to our EcoSolve specific website where you can find more information about the project. And from our work, we see that effective responses to environmental crime can only be designed on the basis of really a large range of data about both the illicit markets and the response itself. And that's where we're trying to contribute. I'm also very happy to answer any questions about the role of data or EcoSolve more widely afterwards. I'll hand back to you, Regina, now. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Christina. This was extremely interesting, and I'm certain even from the panelists there will be many questions, and it links up perfectly to Berit, because Berit is going to talk as well about practical solution approaches from her Safer Space project. And probably Berit and you, Christina, will work together in the future. I can already see it. So I hand over to Berit.
Yeah, thank you very much. Indeed, our project is all about community voices. So I've brought a little presentation here to accompany me because we've collected those community voices also through some arts works, and you will see them as I go along. Yeah, thank you so much also to Regine for inviting me and for seeing those connections between the topic that's being discussed here and the topic we've been working on in our Creating Safer Space network. Carla just used the term creating safer space for communication, but as you will see here, our focus was quite different. But I think you will see, so we didn't start out to work on environmental crime or nature or any of this from the start. But I think there are lots of overlaps here. So our research network is on unarmed civilian protection and community self-protection. So basically forms how communities keep themselves and others safe in contexts of political violence, violent conflict, and other types of violences in different parts of the world. And that has also involved transnational organized crime. And the point I want to make here in my short initial presentation is I think that we can understand better and support more the central role that these self-protecting communities have also had or are having in many parts of the world as kind of, we could also always say, almost say first defenders against environmental crimes and resource exploitation. I'll guide you a bit through how I come to this. And I start by just showing you what our initial focus was so you understand better what it is that I'm talking about. Here we go. So basically we set out to understand the protection of civilians in violent conflict from a civilian perspective. So what would it take to imagine protection in violent conflict? Not as we see on the left-hand side, how it's often thought about with armed soldiers, here you in blue helmets, but to imagine protectors as everyday kind of activities, proactive strategies without weapons by civilians in these contexts. So what you see on the right-hand side is one of the 80+ women protection teams in South Sudan who do exactly this. They do unarmed civilian peacekeeping. They keep others and themselves and their communities safe through some proactive strategies like proactive accompaniment, like negotiation with armed actors, and many, many more. So as Regina has mentioned, we had 26 projects here. You can see on this map the little kind of where it's a little bit where we spread from 10 projects in Colombia and Latin America through to Africa. We had 2 projects in the West Bank and Palestine and projects in Southeast Asia as well. And earlier this year, we had the opportunity to finally bring the 26 projects that we organized, that we funded on understanding unarmed civilian protection and community self-protection in these different countries together to, for the first time, share their research findings and discuss what kind of higher level learnings that we can draw out of comparing what people have done. Now, the projects most of them have used highly participatory methods. So this is all about finding out what communities have done and to let communities speak about their experiences and systematize their experiences of doing unarmed civilian protection. And one of the big themes that came out of these workshops that we did was actually the links between environment, armed violence, and also unarmed civilian protection. So perhaps from what we've heard from the previous speakers, not surprisingly, people did report when they talked about the threats they were facing in their particular situations, about the kind of environmental threats as well, or threats through transnational organized crime. On the left here, you see a drawing by a participant in Papua in Indonesia, who's basically depicting the illegal or legal forms of logging, in any case backed by government soldiers. And in the background, you see some Papuans whose lands, so these are indigenous lands, who normally live there, fleeing into the mountains. On the right-hand side, you see an example from a place called La Florida in Colombia, where the community used this kind of crochet, textile making to map what is important about their community. And towards the left upper hand corner, you see next to the river as a protest sign that says no to hydroelectric power plants. So basically depicting how they struggle against kind of resource exploitation, in that sense, quite often backed by armed actors in those areas. So perhaps more surprisingly than that environmental crime and transnational organized crime is a threat in communities in areas of conflict, was how central land and nature are in the community's nonviolent self-protection practices. So this ranges from their cosmovision, which perhaps is clearest in the case of indigenous communities, where kind of this separation between humans and nature is not made at all, but also in peasant associations, for example, like you see here in the picture in the middle, or among women's groups, very clear ideas around the value of land and the value of nature. Also in terms of livelihoods, obviously quite often livelihoods are tied to where people are. It's part of land, is part of their identity, of their ancestry and so on. And land, hence also in their forms of resistance and of protection, plays a major role. So these collages that you see here are from a project by Cooperación Jurídica Libertad in Colombia, with different groups in the Bajo Cauca region of Colombia, which is a very violent region. And I've brought you one example from that region, from this research, of what communities actually do to protect themselves, but by extension also their territory, and hence also nature in that territory. So basically the problems that we find in these communities in the Bajo Cauca region are problems of narco-trafficking, illegal mining, and there are also transnational mega projects around different resources, including water and also minerals. In this area, I think it's the area that has most armed groups fighting over territorial control. There's a lot of killings of social leaders, environmental protectors. So Colombia is one of the leading countries, sadly, when it comes to these targeted killings. They're happening there as well. There's a lot of displacement of communities going on, environmental crimes in the more kind of narrow sense. And importantly, there is a marked absence of the state, or if the state is present, quite often in collusion with these more economic, legal and illegal powers. Now, communities don't just sit around and wait for the state to do something or save them, because that's not going to happen. So what communities have done, like those three examples that you've seen in the pictures on the other slide, the indigenous guards, the peasant associations, and the women's groups, is use proactive UCP unarmed civilian protection strategies to keep themselves safe, but also to remain in that territory and to keep illegal and legal armed actors out through things like relationship building with all relevant actors, including armed actors, to be able to negotiate things with them, through territorial demarcation. On the photo, you see how they are planting white flags around the territory, which they want to demarcate as a non-weapon zone, through protective accompaniment of each other so that people remain safe, early warning systems around armed actors coming in, safe houses people can go to. Also in terms of the indigenous groups, self-governments on the indigenous reserves. So there's a quite extensive legal framework that actually protects these lands, but as we've heard already, what is in law is not necessarily in practice. But also, interestingly, strategies around food sovereignty. So to really become independent of that neoliberal market and make these communities basically independent of these forces that try to drive them out of their territories is an important strategy. And then there are also strategies in collaboration with more international actors around advocacy, naming and shaming, or strategic litigation of some of these actors. So I think it's more kind of the start of a question or of a new research I would like to draw out here, because we haven't really started with these observations. But I think in that sense, what the communities are doing in order to protect their own territory and remain on their land, in the end also contributes to them almost being like first responders or defenders of nature. And I think since we can't rely entirely on states and on kind of these international frameworks, we have to bring communities who live in these areas where things are happening much more into the fold of how we think about this idea of security and how to tackle transnational organized crime and environmental crime. So I want to finish here with these two photo voice pictures which have been embroidered, titled United Defending the Territory. On the left-hand side, you can see here in the community of Argelia in Antioquia, community members coming together to do a tour of the river to highlight the problems they're having around river protection in their area. And then on the right-hand side, kind of this networking also with nature in terms of the spiders you can see here. So I'll start here and hand back to Regina and look forward to the discussion.
Thank you very much, Berit. So this was interesting. I think it was, you are a very good panel, a very good combination of different perspectives of our problem, the institutional frameworks, the lacks and gaps which communities have to fill in, but as well the institutional and historic reasons for the whole situation. So what I would like you to do now is have a first internal round among yourselves. Perhaps you put on the cameras so that we can see each other. And then my question to the panelists is, what did you learn from each other? So do you have a question to one of your fellow panelists, or would you like to outline something that you have learned listening to each other, which can contribute to your future work? Meanwhile, I would love to ask the audience to send more questions to our Q&A tool so that we can make a maximum use of our guests afterwards and answer all the questions. So who would like to start from the panel to make questions to your fellow panelists and tell us what you have learned new from them, please? Who wants to start?
Regina, eu não estou conseguindo ligar minha câmera.
I can't turn on my camera. It says it's not working. It says the host stopped it. No, it's, oh, maybe now
there you are.
all right, here we are.
So
Now
we'll
it's
start
working.
with Christina, and then
Cristina,
and then Roberto, and then we go on. So Christina, please.
Thank you very much. And I actually don't have a question, but I had sort of two things that really resonated with me from both Roberto's and Berit's presentation, and sort of just wanted to put these thoughts out there and then see also if they could tell us a little bit more maybe on how they deal with it. So first on something that Roberto said is this question of what is legal and illegal, licit and illicit. And that really resonated with me also in our work on illicit financial flows, where we see that many ways in which illicit proceeds are generated, transferred, and held are not per se illegal, but practically go against the interests of society, the norms of democratic governance, etc. So if it's policies and laws that determine what is illegal, but they're influenced by dirty money and protected by those that do wrong, they might not be illegal, but they remain illicit. And so I think from our perspective, we really see that there's a need to broaden the understanding of what drives and enables environmental crime and illicit money flows, and how illicit actors and markets take advantage of the informal economy, which provides ample opportunities to move funds without oversight. And so I was just curious on your thoughts on this and how you deal with it in your work. If you want to respond or can talk a little bit more about this, that would be super interesting. And
Great.
maybe I'll just stop here and I'll keep my question for Berit for later.
Yeah, great, Christina. So I hand on to Roberto, and your question to Berit comes afterwards. Roberto, please.
Cristina, eu não
Yes,
tenho
thank
trabalhado
you. I haven't worked
sobre o problema da
specifically
lavagem de dinheiro.
on money laundering and questions related to
Porque é
that.
problema que
It
exige
is a problem
acesso a
that
tipo de
requires
informação
access to a type of
que é
information
muito difícil
that
da
is
gente
very
conseguir.
difficult to get your hands on.
A gente sabe que
So,
existe o
of
circuito.
course, we know that there's a
Eu apontei
circle where this happens,
gráfico é o fato de que
and
através
we
do
know that
reconhecimento de uma
through
terra obtida de modo
recognizing
ilegal,
a land that was acquired illegally,
inclusive com
right?
assassinato de pessoas,
By killing people. That's just one example. You know, people are killed, local leaders are killed, indigenous leaders are killed. That is a horrible problem in the Amazon region, problem that we heard about before. But so the acquisition of the land is illegal. But once the land is acquired, you know, I mean, the person is a legal proprietor of the land. No matter how they came into possession of the land, then they're the owner of the land, the proprietor. They're recognized as such, so they can get financing, funds. Francisco, who I talked to about this, he's an economist by training, and he said that what happens, and this is very interesting, and this is actually leading me to a question that I wanted to ask you. There's a lot of corruption in the region. So when we think about corruption, you know, we often forget that there's a whole structure behind it. There's a complete cohesive structure that works like that. And it is the market, the structure of the market, the way the market works. You know, the market lets us work this way. We look at the world and a value, you know, is ascribed to certain things. And it's a world economy where things are ascribed a certain value. Hubert Kurz, for example, the German spoke about that as well. And the problem that I see is as it follows. Chiquito Francisco, he's a great economist, as I told you, that I've been talking about that, but he's also recognized internationally. And he talks about the effecto junior, the junior effect. What do I mean by that? You know, you have you're 70, 80 years old, you have your cattle, you invest into cattle breeding, you don't have to there's no deforestation because you did all that already, right? However, if you now say, well, these people now get credit for not doing any more logging, for not felling any more trees, and then they just pass on the land to their son or their daughter. And then the son or the daughter will continue doing what they did before. They will use the money to keep doing that. So basically, it's money that they get out of the system. All these projects that exist, carbon projects, carbon credits, you know, they will get all of that money, and then they will use it in a manner that is just not correct. Because whenever we talk about corruption, I don't want to be the pessimist here on the panel, but when we talk about corruption, sometimes it seems that we're talking about something, you know, that's clean, but there's a, how do I put that? There's like gray zones, so corrupted zones, but it's not just a small area, it's the whole structure that works like that. So it's very difficult to change that. I don't know if I answered your question or if I made a commentary. Maybe you could also comment on how you see corruption, because you know, the state is just absent in these regions. So I don't know who said it, who said that in some areas there's just no state presence, or if it exists, it's weak. It's not helpful, and it doesn't help the local populations that are losing their lands. So this is a very grave problem, a structural problem that we see everywhere. Vale do Cauca, Yes, but also elsewhere. And I'm sorry, I think I'm too long in my answer. Just one very small detail about what Barrett said. In the 80s and 90s, there was a big movement, very important, politically speaking, from the church communities, from the grassroots, where they really started organizing against these great proprietors of lands. And it was also, you know, important people. They could have had great careers, but instead of following great careers, they defended the local farmers. CPT, for example, they also had special lawyers to defend the rights of the indigenous population, of the small farmers. And this is just very important. This was a big movement that was very helpful for the indigenous people in their territories, because someone stood up for their rights, advocated for their rights. But this is a thing of the past. Today, there's been a professionalization of these activities. So it's no longer the activists that are moved by an ideology. So what we have today, I'm sorry. Yes, it's very interesting. It would be interesting to listen to you telling us about history all day long, but I think it's also important for us to move on in the discussion. Let me just come to an end. I'll finalize. Today, there's a lot of big corporations, big companies that offer pseudo consultancy to local communities, you know, after destroying the living conditions for the people in these communities. And now, Barrett, a very specific question to you. We have a community that I've been accompanying for a long time, a settlement of farmers that I've been supporting for a long time. And right now, I have a friend who has a small NGO. They work with a group of women who sell products that they get from the forest. And yeah, was one person died recently from a heart attack, but that's another story. But they receive death threats all the time. This NGO that my friend belongs to, they have funds, they have money. So they have an account where money can be transferred to, but then the money never arrives. There's something we call PIX in Brazil. It's a direct money transfer to a specific account. And whenever you have a PIX, then people can automatically transfer money to this account. However, when people transfer money to that account, it just never arrives in the account. So the director of the bank was a friend of the mayor, and the mayor is one of you know, the big bosses in the illegal activities that happen locally. So they made sure they didn't get their money on the funds that were given to them. And this is such a big project. You know, I think he will have to face up, my friend, they will have to face up windmills, if you will. So yeah, I'm sorry, I took too long, but yeah, it's very interesting. I think we'll now hand back to Barrett. And then we also have a number of questions in the Q&A tool. So another 5 minutes here, and then we'll open to the questions from the audience. All right, and now we'll hand over to Barrett.
Okay, I heard my name, so I'm gonna thank you so much, Roberto, for mentioning that. I mean, obviously, unarmed civilian protection strategies are not perfect, but what we found in our network is that people all over the world try to address the problems they are facing through kind of community grassroots work. In the absence of the state, or in kind of states not doing enough, or sometimes the states being the problem, right? So being those where the violence actually comes from. So depending on the context. And I think one of the important things that we've seen is that to have the kind of different levels of solidarity of communities working with others, as you mentioned, lawyers who can help with strategic litigation or other things, depending on what the situation is again, right? And also over time, because transnational companies and invent new ways of exploitation all the time. So also kind of the strategic litigation has to move on and lawyers have to find new ways of doing that. So it's kind of a constant task. But also I saw in the chat some people were asking, so how does this affect us? We can also ask, what can we do? Who can we kind of influence, for example, in the UK where I'm based, or in Germany, or wherever we are based, to help kind of from the consumer end of things to do things. So I'll contact you, I'll talk to you more about your specific case. What I was wondering to everybody else was a little bit in how your work, I would say perhaps reflects also on the structural violences or the structures that enable what we've talked about in the first place. So we've heard quite a lot that the communities who are in those areas that are interesting for transnational organized crime and multinational companies are quite often communities that are quite marginalized in their societies. So be it indigenous people, be it poor people. So those people can least defend themselves from land grabbing, from exploitation, and so on. So there seems to be something going on with regard to allowing things to happen, perhaps because there is racism involved or implicit racism involved, because capitalism has such a high standing. So I mentioned food sovereignty, and actually when communities decide in Colombia and elsewhere to try to step out of those neoliberal logics, it's also some form of trying to protect themselves from these logics that are geared against them in a sense, right? So I was just wondering how that comes into patriarchy is probably another one. We haven't even talked about gender in this. A lot of the social leaders I've been talking about in Colombia who were killed in this Bajo Cauca region are female traditional leaders of their communities, and they are victims of violence, threats, killings, and so on. So I think there's something more going on where kind of these structures, we also need to think about how to dismantle those structures that enable the negative forces, really. And yeah, so kind of as an open question, maybe Carla can take over because she's been nodding and hasn't talked yet, but kind of I think that's important.
Okay, thank you very much. So Carla, would you like to pick up this question?
Thank you. Yes. What Berit just mentioned is very important. And I was just about to ask, in your projects, and as long as Christina mentioned that she moved and provided assistance for people to be in the COP of a couple of weeks ago, how has been your relationship with law enforcement agencies? From our job, what we have been doing in particular in Latin American region, which is the area where I mainly work, is first define how the problem regarding this lack of assistance and this lack of empowerment, our empowering social actors and communities and indigenous people and women leaders, how is the problem seen in the spaces where we work? For example, we have conducted some studies related to coca crop production and illegal logging in Peru. And what we have found is this perverse advantage that organized crime has conducted regarding the owners of the land. So they have created this some incentives for deforestation, and they sometimes introduce landowners to share this land with coca crop producers and coca crop organized crime organizations. So they trick the state somehow and says, if you give me the land, or if I keep the land for myself as a landowner, I will work on reforestation, while organized crime has been responsible for the deforestation of this land first. So this creates a whole confusion regarding what states should do. States cannot take the ownership of a land that has been deforested and that communities are willing to reforestate, but they ignore what the organized crime is doing behind. And this, in the end, affect the community, because community is facing an organized crime problem related to drugs. This create another social problem because of the disruption of families, because people that get involved in organized crime tend to move around the areas where organized crime works. And what happened with kids, for example? The children that live in these communities start to be separated from their families because their families are separated because of organized crime. And some scenarios of human trafficking and child exploitation happened. The same thing, a scenario we face in illegal mining. And the latest scenario that we have been facing is the non-forced recruitment of youth into criminal organizations, in particular for illegal mining. And these are social problems that need to be addressed at the community level. From our perspective and our mandate related the scope of organized crime, we have been finding or providing the findings to the state, because they are the ones that need to develop a policy and structural policy to change this structural injustice. Also, regarding gender, that also Berit mentioned, it's very important to find which is the role of women in these crimes, because women tend to be the ones that are found to be responsible for the latest activity in the value chain. For example, they are the ones that find to be responsible for trafficking wildlife species. And the problem that lead women into these crime is not addressed. The structural injustice, the lack of resources, the lack of opportunities to get involved in an empowering economy is not being addressed. And these are gaps that organized crime took advantage, because they belong in the communities. They are part of the way in which these communities develop, and they are the open doors where organized crime fill in the gaps that the state is not filling in. And this is very important to address. From our side, what we have been doing is providing these findings and get together with other organized organizations, with other UN agencies that work in this particular area, because our mandate is straightforward to address organized crime and corruption.
Okay. Thank you very much, Carla. I think we have to hand over now to Mareike first, because I see there are quite a lot of questions and answers. Mareike tried to systematize them already, and she will hand them in for you. I have one question to Simon. Simon, is this fine with you?
Yes,
and
sure.
you can do the finishing of our talk today. No? So yeah, to sum it, yeah, but it's important from your perspective. But I hand on to Mareike now, so that our audience can have some presence in the discussion. Okay, Mareike, please tell us what are the questions.
Obrigada, Regina. Eu tenho uma pergunta para o Roberto. Você falou sobre
Yes, there's one question for Roberto. You spoke about organized crime in the Amazon region. The media is reporting on the rapid decline in deforestation. However, I have heard that deforestation is now being carried out by the drug cartels, which is not mentioned in the official figures. Can you confirm this? And if so, which criminal groups are involved? Primeiro Comando da Capital or Comando Vermelho?
Ok. Resposta rápida, Roberto.
Muito bem, responder rapidamente, Roberto. O Comando Vermelho, so PCC or CV, are present in the Amazon region. They adapted very well to the existing structures there. Organized crime, you know, I spoke with Regina about it too. What's the relationship between these new criminal groups and organizations that started organizing when they came in, well, within prisons very often. And then the security forces thought it was better to distribute these criminals to other prisons, to other states. And what that did was actually it gave them a great opportunity to expand. And this is what they did. A great territorial expansion resulted from this. So they recruit young people, urban youth, for drug trafficking, because they have to leave their communities, very often families, because of major projects, and then they don't have a social network anymore. They don't have friends. Their family are sometimes very far away because they have to move just anywhere, and then they don't have no one to turn to. And then they're traumatized. Sometimes they can't find a place in the workforce, and they're approached by these criminals. And very often, then they actively participate in the digging and illegal mining that happens there. And yeah, what happens, what Christina probably is getting at or knows about, is that they have great means to do money laundering. I mean, there's no control about how much gold they find, the gold diggers. I mean, it's something you can't control. Very often there's contraband. And then, you might ask, why is it about the quantity of gold? Well, you say, I found that much gold, but in reality, you found less than that. But this is how you explain your funds. And Cacao Rondonia in the 1990s and the 2000s, it was the same thing. Those guys, what they did. Roberto, I think, yes, I know, I'm trying to be brief. The question was actually shorter. It was about deforestation, official deforestation figures, and how that has to do with activities of illegal deforestation, whether that's included or not in the official figures. That was the question. No, that doesn't exist. In the official deforestation data that are very precise that we have, there's no information about who contributed to what type or what area of deforestation. What we know is that a part of deforestation has to do with illegal mining, with agriculture, etc., etc. But we do not know who's behind a specific type of deforestation or a specific percentage of deforestation. So we don't have any information on that more specifically. Okay, yes, okay, thank you. Thank you, Mareike. Next question.
Thank you very much. One question to Carla. Where do people in Germany and Europe come into contact with products from organized crime without knowing it, and do they accept these products? Drugs such as cocaine are obvious, but what other products are there?
Thank you so much. This is a very interesting question because environmental crimes also provide to Europe and Asia and Africa products that come from environmental crimes. For example, wildlife trafficking. Just to share with you, 2 years ago, Australia started a criminal investigation for the death of two tourists that consume there is a substance that a frog from the Amazon produce when they are scared, and this product is sold as a spiritual medicine for the soul, which actually poison the body. So imagine how long that a frog that only exists in Peru, Bolivia, and Brazil travels to Australia, and he's yes, it's like it's a substance that's produced of this skin that's actually poison the cell in Australia. And people tend to buy these things because they believe that it's produce some spiritual healing, and it's part of the marketing that surrounds these things. Now it's on trend that there's jewelry made out of jaguar pieces, and they're sell all around the world as something very exotic. Recently, a model presented on TikTok that she acquired a jaguar baby, a jaguar puppy. And she was like, this is normal. All of the people in my environment, they can buy one. Why am the one being judged for this? So this is part of the marketing that surrounds what's exotic, what its new needs created around natural resources, for example. And it's also related to the lack of awareness that we have regarding what's legal, what is not legal, and how to verify which is the source. There is a lack of traceability regarding gold, regarding wildlife species. Christina was mentioned the importance of CITES, but CITES is a very complex instrument for the individuals in general terms. So I believe that we all need to start creating more sensitive and friendly mechanisms to start raising awareness what's going on, because otherwise organized crime is conquering the world. In this particular case, countries that are rich in biodiversity are not the strongest countries regarding law enforcement, for example. And this is an advantage that organized crime is taking. And it's something that needs to start working on in a very friendly way. As organized crime works, you can Google in internet how to access, for example, I don't know if you have heard Cambo parties. These are parties that use the poison of a frog that comes from Peru to intoxicate people within the parties. And you can just Google it and save a space for it in Miami, for example. So it's easy to get in contact with environmental crimes. And it's actually very hard to get involved or to provide support to a criminal investigation because it has a lot of logs, a lot of deadlines, and a lot of complex language. That's why most of the time, people who get involved in organized crime as consumers are not aware of it. And this is important to be addressed.
Okay. I would like to add something to this. A personal experience some years ago, I did a talk on a hip hop party on cocaine in Berlin in a club, midnight. It was a midnight talk on exactly this question. So what is our collective responsibility if we take cocaine? And I showed them the corridas, narco corridas. Jose Sabio, it's these super violent musics, no? And told them that they are co-responsible. If they take cocaine, they are strengthening these structures. And they were utterly shocked. They had never, ever thought about it. They thought, taking cocaine is cool. No? So it is very important, this question. It's very important that people link up to their personal responsibility if they are engaged in illegal products. No? I think it's very important. So I think now it was just one association I had, and I think before we finish, I go back to Mareike, but it is important that perhaps you get in touch with each other, and so you can continue. We will provide the emails of everybody, and so you can continue discussions of specific topics if you want to afterwards. Okay, back to Mareike. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for all your questions. Regarding the time, I have one last question to Simon. What role can international climate agreements, such as the Paris Agreement, play in addressing the links between transnational organized crime and environmental degradation? And how can these agreements be strengthened to better tackle these interconnected challenges? Thank you.
Thank you, Mareike, and thanks for the question. I have to be honest, I'm not a climate policy specialist, so I'm not sure if I can really comprehensively answer the question. I just can say that, I mean, I think the climate COPs and climate agreements in themselves already are pretty challenged with resolving the main problem posed before them, which is the climate change, global warming problem. And a lot of people start doubting about if it's effective enough, the frameworks that are there. So let alone addressing other universal or global problems there. What I can see is that during the climate COPs or in the resolutions, of course, within the UN cosmos and system, there can be references and strengthened references to other UN conventions, just like what Carla mentioned and also Christina mentioned, the UNTOC and the works on an additional protocol on environmental crimes. And of course, what we see increasingly during the climate COPs is that there are alliances forming. So if not everybody can agree, at least a few states can form an alliance and agree to tackle a certain question. And of course, it would be very much welcomed, and I think it becomes very clear from this discussion that the interconnections between organized crime and the fight against climate change should be strengthened at the climate COPs as well, more and addressed there. But I put also in the chat the link to our dossier on the ongoing climate COP at Baku with more background on this. Thank you very much. I think I'm just going to hand over also at the very end to Regine. From my side, this was a very exciting and interesting discussion. I learned a lot. Not least the difference between environmental crime and crime that affect the environment. It's an important distinction, and now I finally understood it completely, I think, thanks to Carla. And no, and I think it's really very vital that we continue the discussion. We'll be in touch about this, and this is such an interconnected field that can only be addressed by civil society, international organizations, states, the private sector, academia, and so on. And for my field of human security, it was of course particularly interesting what Barrett presented about the unarmed as resistance and ways of doing peace building in a different manner than the traditional one. So thank you so much. Thanks to also our event management, the translators, Regine as our great moderator, to all the panelists and everybody who came to tune in and ask questions. Regine, I'll hand it back over to you for final words. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much from my side as well. I think it is so important to link up the different communities. So I think we have the security community, we have the grassroots community, people working on climate change, deep research in the Amazon. So it is so important to understand how historic developments give ground to what is happening nowadays, and how we need, for example, the idea of mainstreaming global politics is a very difficult idea if we don't keep in mind that there are very different historic situations where crime is happening. So without understanding really what is happening, it is difficult to draft policies. So from this point of view, I think it's so important that we keep in touch, that we talk with each other and open up more dialogue between the different thought communities. The climate change, the climate politics, which are now always addressed in the Amazon, they don't take into account those historic structures Roberto related to us, and what it means to have criminal fractions in remote areas where mitigation projects are being planned and so on. So it is important to keep in touch and to learn from each other's experiences. And obviously the time was very short, but I hope you get in exchange with each other. I thank you so much for your valuable contributions. It was extremely interesting, and I wish you a very nice day from now on. Okay, so we talk to each other. Bye-bye.